Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins. I'm joined as always by Brandon Scott. You know him as B. Scott. Well, we are just a few weeks away from the tip-off of the 2023 basketball season, the college basketball season. It's going to be a lot of fun. Very excited for that. And today we're going to discuss players to watch, top storylines, and biggest matchups for Purdue, IU, and Notre Dame. We're also going to discuss some mid-majors to watch out for, as well as give you our Final Four picks. We're ready for college hoop season. A very fun time of the year, B. Scott. We talked about the Pacers a couple of weeks ago, but now it's time for some college hoops. A lot of different storylines coming into this season as you've got a lot of turnover for IU and Notre Dame, and then you've got a Purdue team that's on a mission after the early exit last NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it should be a pretty good college basketball season as a whole. I mean, we're seeing teams that are really taking advantage of the transfer portal, and we're seeing teams that are just keeping their players around longer. I mean, it's going to be pretty exciting, and I think it's more wide open this year than people want to believe it is. I think everybody's about ready to crown either Kansas or Duke national champs, but I mean, what's new? That's what they do every year.
Right.
But I think it's pretty wide open. I mean, if last year was any indication, we're in for a wild ride this year as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be a fun year. And I mean, look, except for the Gonzaga Baylor year, I'm going to get into the Final Four, obviously a little later in the show, and some of the trends there. But it's rarely the top few teams that end up being the ones that cut down the nets.
I mean, last year, who would have? I think one bracket picked UConn. I mean, I think maybe more brackets picked UConn, but I don't think they had them playing
San Diego State.
San Diego. I don't think they had that Final Four. Nobody had that Final Four.
San Diego State was literally the only team that was ranked at the beginning of the season of all the Final Four teams. So, yeah. Pretty wild how that all panned out. Want to let you guys know, sorry about, I know we had said we were going to be back the following week. We actually took almost a couple of weeks off, so welcome back. Sorry for the brief hiatus. Went to Seattle, got back from Seattle, had to shake off the rust a little bit, get back used to not waking up at 4 a.m. because it's 7 Eastern time. So we're back. We're going to be, on that weekly duty, until the end of the year. At least we're going to try to be as we parse through the college football, the college basketball, the high school football season, all that good stuff. But tonight, we're talking about college basketball. It's going to return in less than a month, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Notre Dame tips off against Niagara on Monday, November 6th. Purdue opens up against Samford also on the 6th. And then IU gets underway November 7th against Florida Gulf Coast.
Exhibition play is already underway. I think we're 8 days away from Purdue's broadcasted fancy scrimmage against Arkansas. A game that's going to be played, and proceeds from the game are going to victims of a tornado from this past summer. So we're here. Yeah. We're at college basketball time already.
Right in the thick of it. And let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go basically through the teams that we're going to go through Purdue, IU, and Notre Dame. We're going to go in order of where they're ranked currently. And so that means we are going to kick things off with the Purdue Boilermakers, who come in number 3 in the preseason AP poll, number 2 in the coaches poll. They finished 7th in ESPN's Basketball Power Index last season. And taking a look back at what they did last season, they finished 29-6, 15-5 in the Big Ten. They were the Phil Knight Legacy champs, beating number 6 Gonzaga, number 8 Duke. That's when they had all the fervor, because we expected last year to be a growing year. And it turned out to be, even despite the disappointing ending, better than what we expected. They were the Big Ten regular season champs, the Big Ten tournament champs. They became the second. Of course, they become the second ever number 1 seed to lose to a 16 seed in the NCAA tournament, getting upset by Farley Dickinson. Looking at this season and some notable returnees for the squad. You've got center Zach Edey coming back, of course, the senior. Really excited to see him come back. I know a lot of people were wondering if he would go to the NBA. He comes back, ultimately gives Purdue that that hype again going into this year. He was the 2023 National Player of the Year. He was a 2023 Consensus First Team All-American, 2023 Big Ten Player of the Year, 2023 First Team All Big Ten, and the 2023 Big Ten Tournament MVP. He
won every award.
Every award. He averaged 22 points, 13 rebounds last season. He was an absolute force. You've got Fletcher Lawyer back. He's a sophomore. He averaged 11 points per game last season, 33% from beyond the arc. That was fourth on the team. And you've got Braden Smith, who also is a sophomore, 2023 for Big Ten All-Freshman team. He averaged 10 points per game last season and led the team in three-point percentage, shot 38% from beyond the arc. Looking at some notable matchups for the Boilermakers, they kick off the Maui Invitational versus Gonzaga on November 20th. That's a tournament that also includes number 9 Tennessee, number 1 Kansas, UCLA, number 5 Marquette. Those are all teams that are in the tournament. They then play number 24 Alabama in the Hall of Fame series. That's in Toronto. They play the Indy Classic versus number 12 Arizona. In Big Ten play, they have 10 games versus teams projected to finish in the top half of the conference, according to CBSSports.com. They open the Big Ten on their Big Ten road opener is against Maryland. That's one of those teams. They're at IU on January 16th. They're at home against IU on February 10th. Their final 3 games of the regular season are to number 4 Michigan State. They're at number 25 Illinois, and then at home against Wisconsin. So I want to kick it off here with a player to watch for the Purdue Boilermakers, who we think is going to be not necessarily the best player on the team, but maybe a player that will be, that could be a key to their success later on in the season. And who I wanted to highlight is Fletcher Lawyer. He finished second on the Boilermakers in points per game last season. He was fourth in point percentage, 33% as I mentioned earlier. But his stats as the year went on began to drop off as the season went along. In November through February, he was averaging 13 points per game, 36% from beyond the arc. He had 12 plus points, which was above his average in 10 of the first 22 games. Then from February to the end of the season, he averaged 8 points per game, 24% from beyond the arc. He had 12 plus points or more in just 4 of the final 13 games. He was the second leading scorer and shot the best from 3 in the Boilers' loss to Farley Dickinson. So if Purdue wants
That's not either.
Right, exactly. He was one of the bright spots, but it was good considering his second half of the year. It was really good for him to shine in a moment where Purdue did not shine. So it was good for him to kind of rebound, even though the rest of the team kind of crumbled around him. But if Purdue wants to win the Big Ten and make it further in the tournament than they did a year ago, they need both Lawyer and Braden Smith to continue to grow and improve in their sophomore seasons. And, because you've got Zach Edey coming back. He's got all the hype and the accolades. You've got even Braden Smith, who is, all Big Ten as a freshman. On the all-freshman Big Ten team is what I mean to say there. So Lawyer is kind of that one that even though he was really good in points per game, he's probably the one of all those 3 that needs to improve maybe the most, and I think he's going to have and can have a breakout season if he can have a complete year and not drop off down the in stretch like he did a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, I expect to actually see some good things out of Fletcher Lawyer this year, him to take that next step. I think as the season went on, I mean, it's a grind. It's a big grind coming from the high school level to starting for a Big Ten team who's number 1 in the country and all that weight on your shoulders with that. Your legs get shot. I mean, in Matt Painter's offense, it's a lot of motion, so you're running constantly. People that watch Purdue, and I think I've mentioned it a ton of times here on this show too, if you listen, you'll hear Matt Painter constantly yelling when his team's on offense, move, move, move. And it's just constant motion. So your legs get shot.
Well, I mean, you look at it, when he started to drop off, that's around the time the high school basketball season ends. So that's one thing I noticed when I was looking at the numbers. So like you're onto something there as far as, getting tired as the year goes along.
The same thing happened to Braden Smith. His numbers started to drop off a little bit as well there at the end. And, that kind of is expected. It's a lot to ask from freshmen. But the player I'm looking at is a player that is going to come in and kind of plug a hole that Purdue had, and that is transfer Lance Jones. He's a senior transfer. He's got 1 year of eligibility, but this guy adds a definite toughness that is needed. Some lateral quickness that Purdue was missing at times last year when defending on the perimeter. He is going to be a strong secondary ball handler, and he plays tenacious defense. So this is a player that's going to kind of fill a need that Purdue had, an area that they struggled in last year. I mean, there's a whole series of guys that are new to this team this year that are going to play critical roles. Lance Jones being one, Cameron Hyde, the redshirt freshman. His length and athleticism are going to be key contributions, and then true freshman Miles Colvin from Indianapolis. Those three guys are going to be definite added. Like, the athleticism is going to bring a different dimension to this Purdue team. But Lance Jones, from what I'm hearing out of practices already, is that this kid is a born leader. He's kind of stepped in and already taken up a leadership role within this program. He's showing where he fits, and where he fits is where Purdue needs him. So I'm not expecting huge numbers per se. So when you look at Fletcher Loyer has the ability to take that next step and increase his numbers and be a little bit more consistent, or find himself around that 36 to 38% shooting range or shooting percentage from three. Whereas Lance Jones is not going to be a stat stuffer, but he's going to be that guy that's going to get a lot of the little things done. That he's going to be a reliable player out there on the court and doesn't have to get into a shooting rhythm. He's going to be able to slash it and take it to the hoop. He's going to play lateral quick defense. He's going to be kind of that guy that Purdue needs in different areas at different times. And that's kind of like another, I want to almost say another Mason Gillis, because Mason Gillis is that type of player where he's not going to stuff the stat sheet every night, but he's going to have his moments. But otherwise, he's out there because the other team is struggling when he's on the court. So I think Lance Jones is going to be very similar, a type of similar player to that, just at the guard position instead.
With every team we break down tonight, we're going to do a hot or cold question for each team to kind of focus on a storyline. The hot or cold take for Purdue is Purdue will be a number 1 seed in the 2024 NCAA tournament. Now, the silver lining that you saw all over Twitter, X, whatever it's called now, after Purdue was upset by Farley Dickinson, was that, hey, when Virginia became the first number 1 seed to lose to a 16 seed, the following year they won the NCAA tournament.
And they had to get through Purdue to get to the Final Four.
Right. And so Virginia was the number 1 seed again in 2019. So if you're on that train of thought, whether or not Purdue can repeat history and do what Virginia did, you would like to think that they would have to be a number 1 seed again. Now, of course, all things look good here in the preseason. They're in the top 4, so by that logic, they should be a number 1 seed again. But obviously, the topsy-turviness of the season can go either way. And I looked at the numbers here. Purdue has been a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament 4 times: 1988, 1994, 1996, and 2023. So they've never been a number 1 seed in back-to-back seasons, and the results as a number 1 seed have been a mixed bag. They've made 2 Sweet 16s, 1 Elite 8, but also 1 first-round exit and 1 second-round exit. So they, have excelled as a 1 seed. They've obviously, the most recent ones have been not excelling as a 1 seed. They're the preseason favorite to win the Big Ten. They're number 3 in the AP poll. They're going to be up there again. But for me, I think this one is a cold take. I think this is going to be, it always seems like there's 2 types of seasons for Purdue, or at least what we've seen over, the years doing this podcast. Either we expect very little from them and they exceed expectations, or we expect a lot and they have a little bit of turmoil in the middle of the season, and then they finally at the end of the year kind of pick things back up again. and then get to the tournament. Those are usually the years that we see them make their deeper runs, I feel like, when there's a little bit more topsy-turviness for them going into the tournament, if I'm remembering correctly. So I say this is a cold take. There's a lot of expectations on them this year, and I think they'll be a good team. But just because it's never happened before, I'm going to say they end up being a 2 seed. I'm not saying they're going to go out there and lose double-digit games. I'm just saying I think that they end up, as maybe the first or second best 2 seed, and that's going to be the angle they go into this tournament. Because, heck, their early exits don't often happen in consecutive years either. So I think honestly, I think Purdue is destined to have a good run in the tournament when it comes that time of the year.
I'm actually going to say this is a hot take, because of Purdue's strength of schedule. Their non-conference schedule is a load.
Right.
Gonzaga, potentially matchup with Tennessee or Kansas or UCLA, matchups with Alabama, Xavier, Arizona. It just goes on and on and on. So you can take your lumps in non-conference with that. You have to win a couple. If they go out there and lose every one of their big games, no, obviously. But if you go out there and you take care of business in a couple of these games and you drop one to number 1 Kansas or whatever it might be, that's fine. That's not going to hurt your RPI. It's not going to hurt your resume. Kansas is going to be right up there battling for a 1 seed right at the end as well. I think where it really comes into play for Purdue is I think if they come out of the Big Ten, winning the Big Ten, and I'm not saying the Big Ten tournament, because let's just be honest, by then the committee's usually got their teams wrapped up. But if they win the Big Ten again, it's going to be very tough to not place them. Like if they have, 1 or 2 losses in non-conference, and then they put up a really solid Big Ten season, I can't say how many losses you could take in the Big Ten. Who knows? Because it's the Big Ten. That's the biggest knock on the Big Ten, is that they eat up on each other, and then by the time they get to March, they're toast. But I think if Purdue comes out of the Big Ten as the conference champ, it's going to be very tough to not put them in a 1 seed. How many times have we? I'm sure the number's out there. I haven't looked, but how often has the Big Ten champ, at least the regular season Big Ten champ, not been a 1 seed? It's happened, but
like of recent memory.
I think I want to say when Wisconsin won it 2 years ago, the regular season champs, they split it. I forget I think maybe with Michigan State, maybe, or Michigan. But the committee does hold the Big Ten in high regards because of the conference and how deep the conference can be. But that's what I do believe, if Purdue can win the Big Ten and not stumble too much in the non-conference, I think that's enough to get them a 1 seed. Especially if things pull off the way they did last year. And it's very possible. So yeah, I'm going hot take. I think Purdue ends up being a 1 seed again. When you look at some of the past history of Purdue as a 1 seed, like 1994, that team was a team that really was probably destined to make the Final Four or win it all, but a back injury to Glenn Robinson in the tournament kind of derailed those hopes. And then just a poor shooting night and shot legs last year from freshmen who were honestly a year ahead of schedule, is what doomed them. So I don't know. I feel like this team is going to have a chip on its shoulder, which sometimes when you say that, it's like, oh, that's not a good thing. But I think with this team, it's different. And where we've seen Purdue recently also struggle in the tournament when they falter, other than last year, is when they have big egos on the team. Whether it's Jaden Ivey and he just kind of, oh, this isn't my night, I'm kind of stepping away, and they lose to, was it St. Peter's?
Yeah.
And then, or I mean, he just stands out the most to me. Or AJ Hammond's against North Texas. I think it was. No, it wasn't North Texas for him. That was Arkansas Little Rock. But it's just there's some things where like when Purdue fans look at those teams that lost in the early rounds, you can point to exactly what was wrong and why something happened. And it just, I don't know, this year coming into this season, this team just feels a little bit different. Like there's no egos. This is probably Matt Painter's first team, including back to last year, that really plays as a cohesive unit and plays into their roles, probably dating back to the Robbie Hummel, Etwan Moore, Juwan Johnson teams where everybody meshed into their roles together. And if it wasn't for a Robbie Hummel injury, probably could have been a Final Four team. So yeah, I think it's a hot take. This team can be a 1 seed again.
You talked about the egos. I think if that scenario plays out for you, where they do win the Big Ten regular season, I think they're going in the tournament with maybe, I don't know if they want to say their biggest egos, but I mean you have a player like Zach Edey. You have, I guess they have a chip on their shoulder, but they also, if they come in like, hey, you know what, we told you, we were gonna be good again. I think it'd almost be better for them to come in with less expectations.
The thing is, though, I don't think anybody is sitting there. I mean, some people are because they just can't get off the Fairleigh Dickinson loss.
Right.
I don't think anybody's sitting there saying you're not going to be good. I mean, look, AP poll,
no, I'm
number
saying
3.
If it turns, no, I'm saying like if they go in, like because they've got a biggie. Like I'm saying if they're highly ranked now, there's a lot of expectations on them. If they go and but if they go in and win the Big Ten, like they're going to come in with, I think, egos and all the stuff you're mentioning of the teams that have not done well.
They don't have that type of player on the team where, I mean, Jaden Ivey was a great player, but Jaden Ivey thought of himself as a great player. And if it just wasn't going his way, he disengaged from it. I don't see that there is not that type of personality on this roster. This is a roster that's built up of Matt Painter type players where they're high IQ basketball players. They play tough. None of them, I mean, maybe Miles Colvin and Cameron Hyde, but none of them are like the cream of the crop type player. And these guys they're not ones to read their own headlines. I mean, these guys are seriously down to earth players that smart players, enjoy the game of basketball. And Matt Painter's not going to let any egos start flying around, which helps. I mean, I think you want them to go into the tournament confident.
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think last year maybe they kind of went in a little too underconfident. I don't think they were confident enough in themselves last year because it even showed when you look at how hesitant they were in that first round game to even try to shoot 3-pointers. They just were very hesitant. So I would almost be okay with them coming in and playing confident. Because look, the last time Purdue made a deep run, making it all the way to the Elite Eight and losing to Virginia, that was a confident team. They played with confidence. Went out there and Carson Edwards was a totally different type of basketball player in that tournament. Ryan Klein was a totally different type of basketball player. Grady Eifert. That team came in with a certain level of confidence that you need to have to make a run through March. And they had it. And I think this team could have that as well.
So let's go ahead and move on. Before we do that, though, I want to make this disclaimer. We didn't make it at the beginning of the podcast, but as we talk about each of these teams, we want to remind you that you guys know your team better than us. So if there's something we missed, or something you think we should have said, or anything like that, be sure to let us know down in the comment section. And let us know what you think we missed or what your predictions are. We'd definitely love to hear them.
And we are recording this show
Right.
prior to exhibition games even beginning. So if you are watching this show a couple of days out from the start of the regular season and a player that we have mentioned has gone down with an injury by then, that is why we are talking about said player as a player to watch, because we haven't even gotten close to the season yet.
I say that, we say this because we're going into now one of the most controversial segments that we have every single year.
Every year.
And that is, whether we talk good about them, whether we talk bad about them, it's the Indiana Hoosiers basketball preview. And let's go ahead and dive right in. They're unranked, but they did receive votes in both polls. They finished 19th in ESPN's Basketball Power Index. Their 2022-23 season, they finished 23-12, 12-8 in the Big Ten. They were the Big Ten regular season runner-ups, upset by Penn State in the conference tournament semifinals. They were a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. They defeated number 13 Kent State in the opening round, but then lost to number 5 Miami of Florida in the round of 32. This season, looking at notable returnees, there's a lot of turnovers for the Hoosiers. They do get back guard Xavier Johnson. He's a senior. He played only 11 games last season due to injury. He's one of their standout players. He averaged 10 points per game, 5 assists. Like I said, a lot to replace. They no longer have Trace Jackson Davis. He's in the NBA now. He led the team in points per game, rebounds per game, and assists per game last season, with a average of 21 points, 11 rebounds, and 4 assists per game last season. Their leading three-point shooter is gone, and Miller Kopp. They also lose Jalen Hood-Schifino, who had an amazing freshman year, and they also lose Race Thompson. A lot of key players from what IU's had the last few years gone. Their notable matchups: they play number 6 UConn in the Empire Classic. A win leads to a matchup with either number 18 Texas or Louisville. They face Auburn for Holiday Hoopsgiving. They play number 1 Kansas at home. Looking at Big Ten play, they have 9 games against teams projected to finish in the top half of the Big Ten, according to CBSSports.com. They open Big Ten play at home versus Maryland. They play Purdue twice in a month span, at home on January 16th and on the road February 10th. 3 of their final 4 games of the regular season, they're at home against Wisconsin, at Maryland, and number 4, Michigan State. Of course, all those teams projected to be in the top half of the conference, according to CBS Sports. And when I look at my player to watch, I'm looking at Anthony Walker. He's projected by Fansided to be the Hoosiers' starting small forward, the position vacated by Trace Jackson Davis. He was a transfer from Miami of Florida. He averaged 3 points per game last season for the Hurricanes, shot 42% from the floor. He's a guy that never, he was in and out of the rotation for the Hurricanes. He averages 5 points per game, 3 rebounds for his career. His best year was 2020-2021 when he scored 10 points per game and averaged 5 rebounds per game while playing 26 minutes per contest. He shot 43% from the field through his time at Miami, 21% from beyond the arc. So the numbers aren't super inspiring for Walker. They're not ones that really jump off the page. But with all the turnover on the Hoosiers roster and considering who he's replacing in the lineup, it's safe to say that a lot of eyes will be on the Hurricanes transfer. Now, obviously, not Trace Jackson Davis. I don't know that any of the IU Hoosiers, of course, they'll correct me in the comments. I don't know if any of the IU Hoosiers fans are expecting him to be Trace Jackson Davis. And heck, there's a chance that, this is an article by Fanside. There's a chance that he may not even be in that position come tip-off opening night against, Sanford, I think? No, Florida Gulf Coast. There's, no real guarantee that he's going to be in that kind of position for very long, if he is at all. But I think, right now, as we look on the outside looking in, he's a player to keep an eye on for the Hoosiers, like I said, especially considering who he's replacing.
Yeah, I mean, wow, there's some pretty solid players to look at here. I mean, from a leadership perspective, yeah, Xavier Johnson, he's either going to be a 6th or 7th year senior, because he got a medical hardship last year. Trey Galloway is another guy who you could see step up big time into a leadership role and kind of take up that mantle of being your 3-point specialist, kind of filling into that Miller Kopp role. really the two players I'm most interested in watching, just because of the fanfare surrounding them coming to this team, whether it be kel'el, the transfer from Oregon, or five-star player Mackenzie Mbako. I mean, we're looking at some players on this team, especially Mackenzie Mbako, that is being viewed as a first-round pick in the NBA draft next year. So I'm really interested to see how some of these bigger names can come in together and really kind of form a solid team led by Xavier Johnson and Trey Galloway. I'm really interested to see how that pans out, but I think I'm I can say I'm excited to watch Mackenzie Mbako and kel'el Ware. Both of those players have the fanfare around them, and I think are going to be huge keys to this Hoosier team making a run at the Big Ten. I think they do have the pieces in place to contend in the Big Ten for the Big Ten championship. Because honestly, I'll be honest, I don't believe. One, I think IU probably should have been ranked ahead of Illinois. Illinois, it just has a track record of being a dumpster fire after one thing goes wrong for them. And I'm not 100% sold on Michigan State. It's basically the same team, and everybody's like, oh, but they got Xavier Booker. And if anybody watched Xavier Booker in high school, he's got a long way to go to be considered a top player in the Big Ten, or a player that can help his team win a Big Ten championship. I think players like Mackenzie Mbako and kel'el Ware are in a class above Xavier Booker for Michigan State. So I think we could end up honestly seeing a battle between IU and Purdue yet again for a Big Ten championship. So that the games, which is exactly what you want to see out of this rivalry. But some very exciting players, and I think this team has a chance. I mean, if I had to say, I think this team, this is a weekend number 2 in the tournament team. I'm not going to go as far as to say as a Final Four team, but Sweet 16, Elite 8 style team, potentially. Right. I want to be proven wrong, but IU has had the history here recently of faltering once they get to the tournament, and I think this team has the potential to take that next step, because honestly, I mean, as much as good as Trace Jackson Davis was, I do feel like he kind of hamstrung that offense. It was really trying to play it through him as much as possible, and the shooting just wasn't there to assist him. I think the shooting has the potential to be there now more so, and I think IU has what it takes to get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament this year.
Well, heck, that segues us really good into our hot or cold question for the IU Hoosiers, which is, the take is this. This is the year the Indiana Hoosiers return to the Sweet 16. I feel like we talk about this every single year because the last few years, that's kind of been what their ceiling and expectation has been. IU has not made the Sweet 16 since 2016, and until Mike Woodson came on campus, they hadn't been back to the tournament since 2016 either. They were a number 12 seed in 2022. They got bounced by St. Mary's after making it out of the first 4. Cue comments in our comment section about how they had to travel to Portland. Then they were a number 4 seed last season, fell short in the second round versus Miami. So right now, IU is projected to be a 10 seed, according to Joe Lenardi in ESPN Bracketology. They're projected by CBSSports.com to finish 6th in the Big Ten. If the Hoosiers end up a 10 seed, it will be the third time ever they've been a 10 seed or worse in the NCAA tournament. And in those instances, they haven't made it out of the second round. And I mean, you were talking about them, as a high potential of having a deep run, like that's the height of their potential. I just, with all the turnover, with all the uncertainty, I don't see this being a lengthy stay in the tournament for the Hoosiers. I just think, last year was their best chance in a while to get to the Sweet 16. And I definitely think, is it possible? They're a 10 seed, anything can happen, or they could be a 10 seed and anything can happen come the tournament. But just based on what we know now, with all the turnover, things got to mesh together. Maybe in a year or two, when some of the, turnover, when they've built a little bit more stability with who they've brought in, then maybe. But I just don't see it this year for the IU Hoosiers.
I don't want to contradict what I just said, but I think this team is capable of making it to the second weekend. But I'm honestly, I am going to go with it as a cold take of saying they will
Right. I was gonna
make
say
it to the second.
because it's different from saying like, "Hey, I think they can," versus "I think that they will get there."
Yeah. So I think they can if X, Y, and Z happens. Because yes, you're right. There is a lot of turnover, and there is still question marks around their perimeter shooting. Just to be honest, that's an area that they have struggled in for a while, and I think most IU fans would agree with that. That's been their Achilles. Um. Well, first off, thinking back to last year was just such a screwy year in that NCAA tournament, but I just find it interesting that both IU's men's and women's team both lost to Miami to get to the Sweet 16. Kind of crazy, but off topic. But yeah, I'm going cold take because I can't say for certain that they will make the Sweet 16, but they have the potential if these certain things can fall into place. If the team can come together, I think that can happen quicker than you believe. But they got to figure that out because they are bringing in these 5-star players, these 5-star transfers that are looking to go out, have a good season, and then are projected to get drafted in the first round. So when you start having those types of teams, you have to build that cohesion a lot quicker than say like a team like Purdue. Like I say, Purdue has a chance to go much farther than IU because that team has the chemistry built already, and they're just plugging in pieces where needed. Whereas IU does have a lot of turnover. Now it does help when you have some upperclassmen in good leadership roles like Xavier Johnson and Trey Galloway. Those two guys are going to be key components to this team coming together. But yeah, it's a cold take for me now. Honestly, I really do hope they can make it because that will allow them to take that next step, and we will be able to see the Purdue IU rivalry, I think, become solidified as one of the best rivalries in college basketball again.
Well, that's been one of the most fun things about these last couple of years that rivalry has been back on.
Oh yeah, it has been competitive, and then finally, IU is on a 2-game streak now. Right. They snapped that what was like a 13-game losing streak.
That's
to
what
Purdue
I mean. For the longest time, it was just Purdue or whatever, but now it's back to being back and forth and being a premier rivalry.
Where you see that game on the calendar and you go, I don't know how that one's going to come out.
Right. Moving on to our final group of 5 school when we're talking about college basketball here. That's the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Their 2022-23 season, they're not ranked, of course, or not receiving votes or anything like that, so nothing to talk about really there. But the last of the 3 teams that we're going to really focus on and highlight. Last year they finished 11-21, 3-17 in ACC play. They were the 14th seed in the conference tournament, lost to Virginia Tech in the first round. That was, of course, the last season under head coach Mike Bray. They bring in Penn State head coach Micah Shrewsbury this spring to be the new coach. And not much to talk about as far as returnees. That's not saying that they don't have capable players. It's just that they lost a lot coming off of last season. Their notable returnee is forward Matt Zona. He's a senior. He averaged 2 points per game in 20 games for the Irish last season. And like we said with IU, a lot of turnover for the Irish coming into the season. According to CBSSports.com, no one on the roster scored more than 4.5 points per game last season. They lost all 5 starters from a year ago. Their notable matchups, they play Auburn in the Legends Classic. They will play either Oklahoma State or St. Bonaventure to follow should they win that game. Well, no, I guess they also have the consolation ladder, so they'll play one of those teams regardless. They're at number 5 Marquette in December. In ACC play, they've got a tough schedule: 11 games versus teams projected to finish in the top half of the conference. They open up conference play at Miami. Their ACC home opener is against Virginia. They face number 2 Duke at home on January 6th, at Cameron Indoor on February 7th. And their final 4 games are versus Wake, versus Clemson, at number 19 UNC, and at Virginia Tech. Of course, all of those teams projected to finish in the top half of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Players to watch, or a player to watch for Notre Dame. And I'm going, there's not a ton to choose from, but there's going to be a lot of players to watch, because if you're a fan of Notre Dame, you're just going to be watching this team kind of, start to build chemistry and kind of become a cohesive unit. But I'm going to go with Julian Roper II. He's a transfer from Northwestern. He averaged 4 points per game last season, 4 rebounds per game. He shot 45% from the floor last season with the Wildcats. He didn't start a game. He did get 22 minutes per game. By last season totals, he's projected to be the leading scorer on the Irish, just based on last year's points per game. His career numbers: he averages 4 points per game, 4 rebounds. He's a 37% three-point shooter and 38% from the floor. He also has 15 starts to his belt. There's not a lot going on for the Irish coming into this season, so it seems like statistically he is the best scorer they have coming in and will be a focal point on the roster this season. So I'm going with Julian Roper II.
I'm going with freshman Indiana Mr. Basketball Marcus Burton out of Penn. He's kind of okay. So he's got a lot of comparisons to Purdue's Braden Smith, and if that's the kind of player you can get to start building around your team around, that's a good comp for a player you want leading your team. He's going to be a strong leader. He's going to play some solid defense. He's going to put up points. He was basically a player that all the Purdue fans wanted Purdue to try to land, but there was no need for him with the emergence of Braden Smith. And I think if you give Micah Shrewsbury the opportunity to have a player like a Marcus Burton, he's gonna do some special things with him. I mean, not like Final Four special, but this is the type of player that he's going to be a 4-year player. He's probably going to be a 4-year starter, if I had to guess. And he's going to be that key centerpiece as this team grows and as Micah Shrewsbury puts in the system in place that he wants. And look, dating all the way back to when Micah Shrewsbury was an assistant the first time at Purdue, this is a guy that players love to play for. He knows how to get the most out of his players. It's a big reason why Matt Painter originally stole him from Butler, and then Brad Stevens wanted him back, and Micah Shrewsbury went to Boston with Brad Stevens for a while, and then came back to Purdue. And then to eventually take over the Penn State job. And he turned Penn State around pretty quick. Penn State was not great. And then, I mean, look, they were Big Ten runner-ups last year in the conference tournament. Played very, very solid basketball. So I think Micah Shrewsbury could potentially get this team turned around quicker than anticipated. Not saying that they're going to be contending for an ACC title, but they're going to be competitive. They're not just going to be an easy win for these top teams. It's going to be tough. He's going to make it tough on these top teams to come into South Bend. And I think I have a little bit more confidence in Notre Dame because Micah Shrewsbury is their head coach now.
Well, you've been more optimistic on the podcast. I've been a little bit more pessimistic, so we'll see how the hotter.
Well, I'm not saying they're going to have a good year.
I know.
I don't want to get that confused.
I was just segueing into.
They're in a good situation to have Micah Shrewsbury as their head coach now,
right?
And to have a player coming in as a freshman like Marcus Burton, who kind of just embodies solid basketball, which Micah Shrewsbury loves to have in a player.
Right. Hot or cold question for Notre Dame. The take is this: Notre Dame will finish in the top half of the ACC in Micah Shrewsbury's first year as head coach. That's a cold take for me. Not a whole lot to get into here. Micah Shrewsbury has a long rebuild ahead of him. 5 out of 6 ACC experts on CBSSports.com have them picked to finish last in the ACC. Lots of transfers coming in, not a lot of proven talent on the roster. Plus, the ACC is always one of the toughest conferences in the sport. It's going to be a long year for the Irish. I'd say what? Well, because how many games in conference play? I mean, I would say what 20. I'd say a 25% winning percentage would be maybe a win for Notre Dame this year in the ACC.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a cold take. You're right. He does have a long rebuild ahead of him. Look, yeah, I know I said he turned things around pretty quickly with Penn State. And he can do that with Notre Dame as well. I just don't think it's going to be quite as easy because at Penn State, you're a Big Ten program. You're right there near Philadelphia, and there's a lot of really strong basketball there. So trying to convince players coming out of Philadelphia saying, hey, come play in the Big Ten is a lot easier of a task than now coming into South Bend, Indiana, and recruiting players in the state of Indiana against Purdue, against IU. It's going to be a lot harder. I mean, he could probably go into Chicago if he wanted to, but it's going to be a lot harder of a rebuild just because like when he was at Penn State, I mean, Penn State was it. I mean, outside of maybe like Temple, or I guess.
I mean, you've also got like Pitt,
Villanova, and Pitt, but he really tapped in well into Philadelphia while he was at Penn State, and that helped him with his turnaround. I mean, he brought in, I think there was some guys that were like 3 of these guys were high school teammates. So when you have that kind of, you can bring that kind of chemistry in, it helps. But it's going to be a little bit harder to have that turnaround at Notre Dame. I have a feeling. So, but that's definitely a cold take.
Looking at the mid-majors, we're going to look at them quickly and then get into our Final Four predictions. So we're going to give a team to watch, and then we'll get into our hot or cold question. My team to watch for the mid-majors, I'm going to go with the Indiana State Sycamores. They're projected as a top 4 team in the Missouri Valley Conference, according to Locked On College Basketball. They finished 3rd in the conference last season, according to ESPN's Basketball Power Index. They also have some decent turnover from last season. We talked about it, with a few other teams on the broadcast, but the fact that they're still considered one of the top teams in the conference with all that turnover in the league, and that's usually, that's the Missouri Valley Conference. Like, that's produced some really good teams in really tough outs come tournament time, typically. So the fact that they're still kind of in high regard in that conference, I think the Sycamores still have a lot going on, even despite the turnover.
I'm going with the Butler Bulldogs. I mean, are they going to do great things in the Big East this year? I don't know, probably not. But I'm interested to see what they can look like this year. Another offseason of Thad Matta getting his system in place, getting his types of players in place for his system. And also, I mean, when it comes to mid-major college basketball in the state of Indiana, it's Butler. It's really hard to go again, like hard to not root for Butler. Maybe IU fans don't like cheering for Butler, but most Purdue fans do, I would say. It's always just fun to watch. I guess it's always an opportunity to watch some really high level college basketball 20 minutes from your front door. So I'm going to say mostly just out of sheer entertainment and historical value. I'm saying, yeah, there you go. See, I'm going to say the Butler Bulldogs. I don't think they're going to have I think it's going to be another tough year for them, but they're still going to be fun to watch, and it's Hinkle and it's the Big East, and it's always fun. It's always like, I love sitting down on a Tuesday evening and turning on FS1 and there's Butler playing. So yeah, give me the Bulldogs as my team to watch.
I'd love to see the Bulldogs, and I'll talk about them a little bit more when we get into the hot or cold question, which is this. The hot or cold question for the mid-major schools, the take is this. We will see a mid-major from Indiana in the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, if you're going by my other takes tonight as well, it's going to be a cold winter, for the state of Indiana from what I've been predicting tonight. But I think it's a cold take. ISU is probably the closest, in my opinion, the state will get. but I'm predicting another year of just IU Purdue being the only two representatives from Indiana in the NCAA tournament. I don't think there's going to be really any mid-major schools that rises to the occasion. And you talked about Butler. That's what kind of stinks. I enjoyed. It wasn't that long ago that you saw it was the regular teams that we'd be talking about getting into the tournament were IU, Purdue, and Butler. And it was always fun when you had, and because sometimes they would be in different regions. So you're like, hey, could we possibly see, 3 of the 4 teams or even 2 of the 4 teams in the Final Four be, from the state of Indiana? And that was always a cool thing to root for. But with Butler kind of on the decline, and with some of the other mid-major schools really competing hard in their conferences but not quite making it, we haven't seen that in recent years. So I would love to see that happen. Maybe ISU gets it together and the Sycamores can get there. Maybe we'll see 3 teams that way. I know IPFW's had some strong years. I think they're in they're either in the Horizon or the Summit. I can't remember off the top of my head, but maybe if they can put it together, maybe they can get in as well. But I think, like I said, I think ISU is your closest bet, but we're going to probably more than likely see another year of IU and Purdue as the only 2 representatives from the state in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, you don't have any faith in the Valpo Beacons?
Maybe. You never know.
Yeah, it's a cold take for me as well. I mean, yeah, you're right. Back in those days when, Purdue, IU, and Butler would be in separate regions. I mean, hey, just as recent as 2010, a lot of experts will say if it wasn't for Robbie Hummel going down with an injury that year, we probably would have seen a Purdue versus Butler national championship game. We very well could have seen that. And that would have been Purdue versus Butler national championship in Indianapolis. That would have been the NCAA's worst nightmare. Because, or for Indianapolis's worst nightmare as well. Hotel revenue would have been 0 because everybody was already here. Yeah, it's a cold take. Look, it's going to be tough for these mid majors, especially considering there's some. I mean, even for Butler, look at the Big East. You got UConn, you've got Creighton. I mean, I'll get into those teams a little bit more here in a second, but if it's any spoilers for later, but it's not going to be a walk in the park for any of these programs, and especially with how good a lot of these mid majors have become. It's not just. I mean, yeah, we still have the same old suspects, but now you have other mid-major programs stepping into the spotlight as well. So it's going to be a cold take. I think it's only Purdue and IU that make the tournament from the state of Indiana.
So before we get going tonight, we're going to give our Final Four predictions, who we think is going to be competing for a national championship at the end of the year. And for me, I wanted to take a look at the last few Final Fours to see where teams were ranked in the preseason, because whenever we do this, I'm like, how far out of the top 10, top 15 do I really want to go with this when I'm looking for a team to put in, or looking for teams to put in the Final Four? And so I looked, of course, last year, mentioned a little bit earlier, San Diego State was the only team that was ranked coming in at 19. UConn, Florida Atlantic, and Miami were all unranked, though the Huskies and Hurricanes received votes. In 2022, you had number 3 Kansas, number 4 Villanova, number 9 Duke, and number 19 UNC all make the Final Four. That's where they were ranked in the preseason. In 2021, you had number 1 Gonzaga, number 2 Baylor, number 17 Houston, and number 22 UCLA. So you see kind of a trend of, you might see a couple of teams that were ranked highly in the preseason, but hey, sometimes you get a team that was barely in the top 20. Now, granted, we're looking at these rankings from college football to college basketball, where in college football it's the top 25 out of 136 as opposed to the top 25 out of 300 plus in college basketball. So it's a little bit different because the 20th ranked team is a lot better than the 20th ranked team, in college football. But then in 2019, you had number 5 Virginia, number 10 Michigan State, number 11 Auburn. Texas Tech was unranked but received votes. So looking at those numbers, we should be looking at a couple of teams inside the preseason top 10 and a couple of teams that were preseason wild cards. We don't really know where they're going to come from. So for me, my teams that come from inside the top 10, I'm going with the Duke Blue Devils. Kyle Filipowski was one of the best freshmen in the nation last season, and he's a potential lottery pick. He averaged 15 points, 9 rebounds per game last season, shot 44% from the floor. They've also got Jared McCain, who's part of the ESPN Top 100. He's ranked 12th. And they have Jeremy Roach back at the point, who scored 14 points per game last season. So they're going to be a really strong team coming into this season. I've got Michigan State in there, too. I know you said you weren't super high on them, but there is a lot of experience on this team. They've got senior Tyson Walker, who averaged 15 points per game, shot 46% from the floor last season. Senior A.J. Hoggard, who averaged 13 points, 6 assists per game last season. Junior Jaden Atkins, who averaged 10 points per game, 4 rebounds last season. Tom Izzo also added several top 30 recruits, so they've reloaded a bit while having a lot of good senior leadership. So I think they end up getting to the Final Four. And then teams that I'm looking at from outside the top 10, I'm going to go with Gonzaga. I mean, they hit the transfer portal hard this offseason. They added Ryan Nembhard from Creighton. He averaged 12 points, 5 assists per game last season. They've got Steele Venters from Eastern Washington. He averaged 15 points per game, shot 46% from the floor last season. They have Graham Ike from Wyoming, averaged 20 points per game for the Cowboys 2 seasons ago. Sat last season due to injury. And so, some of those names may not jump off the page necessarily to you, but also, I mean, Creighton's been a tough NCAA tournament team the last 2 years. Wyoming was in the tournament a couple of years ago. Of course, that Graham Ike season that he was amazing. That's when they lost to IU in the first 4. So I mean, these are players that have tournament experience. You're bringing in guys that have done it at their respective schools prior to coming to Gonzaga, and it's been a while since Gonzaga's been there. I know they have a lot of high expectations. I know, of course, just a few years ago they were in the championship, but the years surrounding that, it feels like they've had high expectations and have fallen short, especially these last couple of years. So I think they bounce back. And then probably the biggest wild card. This is my Texas from the preseason, our preseason college football playoff preview, where I kind of tried to go off the reservation. And hey, if this clicks as well as the Texas one, I'll be a happy man. I'm going with USC. I'm going with the USC Trojans here. Boogie Ellis is back, who averaged 18 points per game last season. They landed Isaiah Collier, the number 1 recruit on ESPN's 100. They bring in DJ Rodman from Washington State, who averaged 10 points per game, shot 38% from the beyond the arc. So the USC prediction may have gotten a collective groan, a collective eye roll from people expecting me to say Bronny James and say his name.
Honestly, I gave you the eye roll.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But honestly, the Trojans have plenty of talent outside of Bronny James. I know because of
Hey, and it's not even 100% certain if Bronny James will even take the court,
right,
until he's fully medically cleared.
Right, but all I was going to say on his end is that they've got plenty of talent. But if he can give them even a little bit of magic, even if it's off the bench occasionally, that's going to be some good things for the USC Trojans. So Trojans are going to get a lot of hype because of Bronny James, but I think they have a lot more than just him coming into this season. I think the Trojans make a deep run in the tournament.
I like the Ryan Nembhard mentioned there. His brother, a Gonzaga grad who, showed out well for the Pacers for a while. For my picks, I'll tell you what, coming right now, I just feel like things are kind of a little bit more wide open again. So I'm going with my gut and what I feel like. I'm kind of going with a little bit of a mix of top teams and close to top teams. I think Kansas makes it. One, Bill Self just escaped another potential violation, NCAA violation. And typically when he escapes those types of things, Kansas has a good year. Just saying. So Kansas makes it to the Final Four. I also have Purdue. I think, like I talked about earlier, I think this team has the pieces in place to make that run to the Final Four, and they're going to have that fire burning inside them, similar to what Virginia did after they lost to UMBC. My next Final Four team, I'm going with Creighton. Yes, Creighton's the number 8, preseason number 8. I just feel like this team, it's another one of those teams that's an older team They've got that experience. They've got shooting. They've got an interior presence with Ryan Kalkbrenner. This is going to be one of those sneaky good teams that they're not going to be in contention for a 1 seed. I don't think, probably not, but they're going to be that team that if you have them in your bracket, you're going to go, ugh, that's not you might think it's going to be easy just from name recognition and everything, but they're very good. And then my last team, I'm actually going to say the UConn Huskies make a run back to the Final Four. Look, they lost some key players, but they reloaded. I mean, they brought in some really good recruits. This team probably could be better than last year's team. And last year's team ended up being good. It's tough to say because that Final Four was the most wackadoodle Final Four, I think, ever. And I'll tell you what, from being at the NCAA at that point, everybody inside was like, yeah, that was not good. That was not a good Final Four whatsoever for us. So, but I think UConn has the pieces in place to make a run back to the Final Four this year.
I like that you mentioned Creighton. They're a team I debated on. I also debated on Florida Atlantic because they basically returned their team that made it.
You know what? I'll tell you what. I think because everything was so wackadoodle in that tournament last year, that really benefited a team like FAU. And I feel like everybody's just so overhyped on them that it's going to be tough for this group of players to live back up to that hype. And then it's going to be, what's going to happen is something like they're going to lose some games and everybody's going to be like, well, what happened? What's going on with Florida Atlantic? Why are they losing? What's going on? This should be a Final Four team and blah, blah, blah. It's like, were they really a Final Four team last year? Or did they just get hot at the right time, which is exactly what you have to do in March. But nobody would have had them going to the Final Four. So why are we placing them so high up in the polls other than just hype?
Right. It makes
that makes me nervous about that team.
You saying that just reminds me when I was in the Ball State band my freshman year. It was the year after the undefeated season, and everybody in the band, when they were losing to North Texas game 1. This is when North Texas, I think North Texas is still bad in college football, but they were really bad, when they played Ball State, and everybody was like, why are we losing to North Texas? This team went undefeated last year. And me being the, guy who grew up around here was like, no. This is the norm. This is what we're used to from this team. This isn't, last year was the fluke. It's not going to happen. So yeah. I'm not saying FAU is going to be like that. No.
Yeah. But similar to overhyped.
Right. So we'll see. So you have, Kansas, Purdue, UConn, and Creighton. I've got USC, Gonzaga, Michigan State, and Duke. We'll see. We'll track those, of course, when we talk about college basketball throughout the year. We'll touch base with that again. But that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for hanging out. You can like us on Facebook, 3C Media. Go follow us over on Twitter at 3C Media Sports. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're not already there. Hit subscribe, ring the bell. You guys showed a lot of love to the Pacers preview, and we appreciate that. Go check that out if you haven't seen it. Also, go over to our TikTok page. We have a lot of good content over there as well. And remember, you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. You can find me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87. And I had to pick Creighton to go to the Final Four just to give a little bit of love to my creator team out at Creighton.
Yeah, and they're going to have a good team this year. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch the Blue Jays. Next week, we are going to be, and we're going to be back, of course, releasing on Wednesday. Next week, we're going to give our 3C Media team for the regular season for Indiana high school football, as well as giving our state finals picks. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hope to see you there. But until then, have a good week, everybody.